Hi, and welcome to this episode of Bill and Kipp's Excellent Bible Adventure. We're walking our way through the book of John, and we're getting close to the end. In fact, today we're at the death and the passion of Jesus prior to that, found in John chapter 19. My name is Kipp McClurg, and this is Bill Brunson, and we serve as pastors at Vestavia Hills United Methodist Church. And we're glad that you're here with us to learn about this very important part of our history as followers of Jesus. So today our symbol, Bill, is one that most people are familiar with.
Yes, it is truly I don't know if it's a nice way, if it's okay to say it this way, but it's the classic Christian symbol, the symbol of the cross.
And it, for us, as often becomes decoration, this is a very decorative piece, becomes very decorative, but it was in reality a gruesome piece of equipment that was built to kill, and in a very violent way.
Right. Oh, it was a horrible death. And so it is. I think the very pretty ones that are out there, the ornate, the gold crosses that are out there, it's really so far from the original,
right,
that it's hard to make the connection. But crucifixion was truly a horrific way to die, and the Romans really knew how to do it.
Yeah, and to make it especially miserable.
They made it horrible,
and that was the sentence that Jesus had gotten. And so he leaves there with Pilate and begins his movement towards toward his death. And one of the first stops, and all of this is happening in a very small part of the old part of Jerusalem.
Right. And so next to where Antonia Fortress was located, Pilate, after in the 18th chapter, he has gotten to that point where the Jewish leaders and the crowd of Jewish people are shouting for the release of Barabbas. Pilate doesn't know what to do with Jesus, so he thinks if he can maybe make Jesus look like a more sympathetic character, that the religious leaders and others will have compassion on him. And so he takes him to this area outside of Antonia Fortress, which now there is a chapel. This is called the Chapel of the Flagellation, because this is where Jesus is beaten. And I mean, we're talking beaten severely. And then he is mocked, and it is a horrible, it's a horrible experience. They weave the crown of thorns
on him,
right. They're spitting on him. They're slapping him. They're putting this purple robe on him, making him look like a pathetic character.
Right, and really, even I know Paul. One of the reasons Paul he was facing a very similar situation, but he was also a citizen of Rome, but he didn't want to go through the flogging.
Right,
because you could die from that.
Right.
I mean, massive infections from the lacerations, because these whips were not, the leather ones that you buy at Six Flags or something. I had one as a kid, where there was
right.
These had pieces of glass and rock, and
right.
It was designed to really.
The belief was that you could survive 39 lashes. If you receive 40, you would die.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, these, like you were saying, those strips of leather with shards of metal or glass in them are ripping your skin. I mean, horrible. So they make him look like this, and they bring him out, and he has nothing. Well, Pilate has nothing against him. And Jesus is now not looking in any way threatening. And they bring him back out to the Jewish people, and they say, "Here, this is the man, you know, and
it's the guy you're afraid of."
Yeah, I don't see why you're afraid of him. And of course, the Jewish leaders start screaming that he is saying he is the Son of God. We can't deal with this, and he is saying, well, he says he's your king, and well, they're claiming we have no king but Caesar,
which is a huge leap, because they didn't want Caesar to be king, and wouldn't even carry coinage with his image on it.
Right.
If they were truly proper Jews. And so the whole conversation just devolves into this ridiculous. They're going to get him crucified one way or the other,
Right.
and that's and the whole time Pilate's trying to figure out, okay, how do I just keep this under control?
Mm-hmm.
And so the next step from there is after he is flogged, he, I guess, starts walking on toward Golgotha.
Yeah, at that point it is. I mean, he has beaten him. He's done all of this. He's shown them. He's just, he looks horrible. He's wounded. And yet when he's asking the Jewish leaders and others, what do you want me to do with him? They're shouting, crucify him. And so, yes, for Pilate, the easiest answer at this point, he finds that he's guilty of nothing. There is no reason to sentence him to death under Roman law, but to appease these people, to keep peace. When they're saying, if you release him, you're no friend of Caesar, Pilate's not going to have his career ruined by an itinerant rabbi who happens to have irritated the powers that be. And so
he literally sacrifices him on the altar of the people's desires.
yes. And so it's time to take him to Golgotha. Now they call it the Via Dolorosa as he's walking there. And what you see in this picture is underneath the ruins of Antonia Fortress, you can go underneath that area into where the entrance to the old Roman street was that would run into Jerusalem and take him through Jerusalem on his way to Golgotha, because he would move his way through the city and then out of the city as he is going. And this is, in Antonia Fortress, this is an area of the road that was enclosed. It was, it had an archway on this end and on this end, but you'll notice the ribbed street, the streets have this ribbing in it. If you came through, you had to slow down. If you were in a wagon or pulling a cart, it makes noise. You couldn't sneak into the city. Soldiers would come. But this is where they believe, historians have always believed, that Jesus is handed the crossbeam of his cross that he would ultimately die on, that he is handed the crossbeam, it's placed on his shoulders, and he is told to start walking along with the other two who would be crucified that day, walking toward Golgotha, the place of the skull.
And that was outside the city, and it was, of course, it would still be inside what we think of today as Jerusalem, but it's outside of the old
Right.
city. And so they walk. That is where people think of the Via Dolorosa, and they walk through the streets until they get to that place.
They go outside the city walls and they get to the place of the skull, the place of Golgotha, also called Calvary. And it's there that he is crucified. And we often think of in most depictions, the nail is through the palm of his hand. But the belief system, or the understanding of anatomy in that period of time, the hand and the wrist were basically connected. They were thought of as one, as the hand, because the wrist pivots the hand. And so crucifixion was done by placing the nail through this area between the two bones of the arm and then the hand, so that, because there is an area there that you can drive through,
Right.
that is
support weight.
that would support
actually.
weight.
Yeah.
And then his knees would have been bent, so that his knees were slightly bent, and then his feet placed on top of each other. Either his feet placed on top of each other and nailed through the top, or his feet were placed on the sides of the upright and nailed in through both ankles, one or the other. Romans used both styles. And then the cross was raised and dropped down into a hole. And the reason they did that was when you would drop, it would basically extend your shoulders, dislocating your shoulders. You would slump down, and then he would begin the process of dying.
Right.
And he would, in order order to breathe, people on a cross typically died of asphyxiation, because in order to breathe, in order to expand his diaphragm enough in order to get a breath of air, he and the other two on the crosses would have to push against the nails in their feet, turn slightly on the nails in their wrist to raise themselves up enough in order to breathe.
So every breath was just this horrible experience of pain.
Right. And the Romans, the period of time when Jesus died, the style of cross they were using allowed people to die usually within a day of asphyxiation. The Romans later, because they wanted to extend this process and extend whatever lesson they thought they were teaching through public crucifixion, they actually would once you were in place, they would place a peg into the upright that would be almost like a seat that would allow you to be partially raised where you could get a little breath without having to push, so it could expand your life. There's some people that think, some historians say, it gets to the point where it would take days for someone to die on a cross. And so Jesus is hanging on this cross, and they decide they're going to place a placard on the cross to Pilate said, because Pilate's trying to figure out what to do with this and how to explain this to anybody, why he's crucifying Jesus. And so he writes, King of the Jews, because you can't really exalt yourself above Caesar in the Roman world. So King of the Jews. And he places that on the cross. Of course, the religious leaders don't like that.
Right, because they don't see him as King of the Jews. But that was their argument to getting him crucified.
Right.
So from Pilate's perspective, it needs to stay.
Yeah. They're saying, why don't we write and say he said he was the King of the Jews? And of course, Pilate said, I've written what I've written. It's over. It's already on there. We're not changing it, and it stays.
There's some interesting things that happen here. One is the moment where he looks at John and some of the other friends of Mary, and Mary comes forward and he says, behold your mother, basically handing off Mary's well-being to John, because if you didn't have a lot of children, of course Mary had Joseph had other children, but Mary, we know, was Jesus's mother, but he's handing off almost this at least spiritual guidance, if not physical care, of his mother to John.
And John's the only disciple that appears to be at the cross. And many believe, many church historians believe this is the indication. This helps us to understand that Jesus is Mary's only child, and that Joseph's children may or may not have anything to do with her at this point because of the ministry of Jesus and etc. The sort of the embarrassment that they may be feeling because they don't believe fully that he's a Messiah.
Yeah, I mean, all the way through this, they've been going, we're not sure.
Yeah, and so Jesus, with Mary not having a male child to take care of her as she would be getting older, Jesus is worried about his mother, concerned about his mother, and so he places her in the care of John. And church history says that Mary stayed with John the remainder of her life, and that he cared for her as she grew older until she passed away. So it was a sort of a touching moment when Jesus on the cross is caring about someone else.
Right. In his death, he's worried about her. And then there's the moment where he just says he's thirsty, and they bring him a drink mixed vinegar mixed with a myrrh, I think. Right. And what would the purpose of that been?
Well, it was. Some people say that it was more of that it had a sedative quality, that it was a pain reliever or something that would help with that. It was a little bit of cruel. I mean, if you're hanging there and you are dying and you are thirsty, and someone dips something in a bucket and hands it up to you, you're thinking you're getting water, and instead you get vinegar. Yeah. I mean, it's almost
it's truly insult to injury.
It is. It's just cruelty to do this.
Yeah, and so, but it's done interestingly in John on a piece of hyssop.
Mhm.
And it's kind of like we saw with the charcoal. It doesn't appear very often in Scripture. But the other place that it appears is when, if I remember right, when Moses instructs the children of Israel to put the blood of the lamb across the doorpost so that they would experience the salvation of God, they use hyssop to do that, to apply that. And so you see this, of course, there's always been a lot of connections with Jesus and Moses and other prophets, but you see this salvific moment almost where there's a symbol that's kind of being carried that John sort of slips in there that is pretty interesting. Now we have several pictures of some of these locations. Of course, nothing is like it was 2,000 years ago.
Oh,
There's
absolutely not.
been multiple civilizations and layers built there. But let's look at a few and kind of show us today, if we went, what we would see.
This is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and it's actually located now inside the city of Jerusalem, the walls of Jerusalem, etc. But in the time of Jesus, this would have been outside the wall, this area. And the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is one of the oldest churches, established churches. The Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem is the oldest continually occupied and used sanctuary, but this is also extraordinarily old. In the time of, you have to remember, Jerusalem, 70 A.D., the Romans become infuriated with the Jewish people. There's a lot of rationale why they do what they do, but their answer at that point in Jerusalem is to literally push the temple off of Temple Mount. And again, insult to injury, because that is a sacred spot for the Jewish people. Rome comes and builds a temple to Jupiter, their god, their chief god, on top of Temple Mount. Well, in about 120 A.D., the Emperor Hadrian comes into this area, and he is going to do a renovation. He's going to basically allow a new civilization to form, is his thought. He renames the area and all. And he comes to this area and realizes that for some reason, this has become sacred. And not to the Jewish people, but to this sect of Judaism, as they thought of them, this Christian group that has deemed this holy. And he didn't particularly understand why, but he wanted to make sure they didn't have their holy spot anymore. And so, again, he plows down everything that's here, and he builds because there had been shrines built, and he builds a temple to Jupiter and a temple to Venus in this area. And so it's not until the early 300s when Constantine, the Roman emperor, is converted to Christianity. He sees the symbol of a cross in the sky and has this moment of conversion.
I believed his mother was a convert.
Right, Helena's a convert. And so Constantine is the one who, his mother makes a pilgrimage to the Holy Land. And Constantine, through her, starts figuring out where holy sites are and starts trying to preserve them. And that's when, in spite of the temple to Jupiter and Venus, they realize that people are still coming here and worshiping. And so they start doing their investigation. And they find out that in this area was Golgotha, and as the scripture says, and that near the place of the cross, there was a garden tomb. And so it was very close by. And so around 325, the Roman emperor orders the destruction of the temple of Jupiter and the temple of Venus, has those removed, and begins the building of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre.
So it truly is one of the earliest churches.
And it has gone through several iterations. It's occupied by 6 different Christian groups. But when you go through those doors and you enter, you would look to the right and go upstairs, and you have this area, which is occupied by the Greek Orthodox. And under this altar, there is a hole. And in that hole, you can reach your hand through, and touch the stone that is believed to be part of the stonework that was the place of the skull, the Golgotha. And you can actually see the stone again where they have simply just put glass over the stonework, the stone area, so that you can see the rock
Kind of
all
the original
around.
geology that was there.
Yeah, they sort of allow you to see the geology and see the stones. And so it's really an interesting location. And then if you come down from there and walk around to the other side of the building, underneath this large dome, you have this which is covering the side of the tomb. This framework, or this building that's here, has two different chapels. This chapel is the Greek Orthodox, and this chapel on this end are the Coptic Christians, which are out of Egypt. And several years ago, this structure began to deteriorate rapidly. And so they framed it in with almost a flying buttress system, trying to hold it in, an exterior skeleton, basically. And then they began the reconstruction of it after a period of time. And in the reconstruction, they were able to remove all the things that have been built up over the years and get back down to the lowest area where they found they were able to see true indication that this was an area of a tomb. And just to this side of this structure, you actually have an entrance that will take you into another section of the cemetery where there are more cave tombs that are there. And so while it's all under one building now, with Golgotha on this side and then the tomb on this side, in the time of Jesus, this was all outdoors. This was all open and outdoors.
But so many people came as pilgrims.
Right.
They tried to make it so that it's accessible to them.
One of the oddest things about the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, though, is that around 1100, somewhere in that timeline, unfortunately the Christian groups that occupy the facility do not get along all the time. They have different pieces of theology that are more important to them than others, and they sometimes struggle to be good neighbors. And so around 1100, the keys to the front door of this church were given to a Muslim family. That family generationally has held the keys to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and every day they unlock it and every day they lock it.
So they have an outside party to make sure they get along.
It is called the act of the status quo. Is how everything stays peaceful inside the church.
If it works, it works.
It works.
So at the end of Jesus' life, he's on the cross. He's gasping for breath, and then he finally says, "It is finished." And his spirit leaves, and of course, in Greek and as you get into Hebrew, the same word, ruach and spirit, expire. When we say someone expired, it means their spirit exited, and they breathed their last breath. Right. And all of that means the same thing. And it says Jesus died, and so his body is there, and then comes this very interesting scene where we remember Nicodemus, who showed up with Jesus at night and wanted to ask questions. He shows up again in the early courtyard scene where they haven't decided to arrest Jesus, but they're starting to think about it. And he says, "Hey, give the guy a break."
Yeah.
He shows up with another man, Joseph of Arimathea, and interestingly, he's one of the few characters that shows up in every gospel. But he, in every gospel, lists him as coming in, and they get the body of Jesus. They get permission to take the body of Jesus, and it says that they have 75 pounds of myrrh and aloe. Now, I did not do the calculations of that. I don't know what financially that would cost, but that is a lot of burial spices.
Well, it's considered to be a king's amount. It is far more than anyone really needs. I always wonder if they get that much. Is it because it's a king's amount? someone that's royalty. Jesus is the King of the Jews. He is the King of Kings. Is it because of that? Or is this because this is just the way men do things? If a little is needed, well, a lot will be better. And so they don't know.
Just make sure we don't have to do it twice.
That's right. I'm going to make sweet tea. How much sugar should I put in? A cup? No, I think you ought to put in a pound. It's that kind of thing. Did they say, well, how much do you need? How much do we need? Well, I bet 75
pounds.
75 pounds ought to do it.
I'll take care of it, yeah.
That'll work. And men did not prepare bodies.
Yeah.
This was, we don't want to, it sounds so wrong in today's world to say women's work, but this was the work of women in this generation of time. The women prepared the body for burial. Men didn't typically do this. And so the men, Joseph and Nicodemus, are doing something they have no idea what to do with, probably. And they've got far more spices than they need. And you have to imagine the mess they make. And what this is, the stone here is actually in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, just down from Golgotha. And in that area, when they found, I think, 2 of these in that area when the church was first being built, and they found others in other places. But this stone that's now, of course, built up around, it's edged, and there's lanterns or chandeliers hanging across the top of it and things like that. The keeping stone, or the stone of preparation, was located in every Jewish cemetery, because that's where you would take the body and lay the body and wrap the body with the linen, and apply the myrrh and the aloes, and apply all the spices, seal the body up before carrying the body into the tomb. Because the tombs were small, you couldn't really work in there. And so you had the keeping stone to do that on. And so this is one that was found in this area. And cemeteries typically didn't need a bunch. And so many believe that this may have been the same stone that Joseph and Nicodemus might have used. Mm-hmm. If not this one very much like it.
And so we come to really the end of what seems the story.
Mm-hmm.
This rabbi who traveled around and from place to place, claimed to be the King of the Jews, spoke in this strange spiritual language, is dead. Or at least that's where the chapter ends.
True.
Fortunately for us, it's not the last chapter.
That's right.